Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. Hey everyone, I'm Mark Moyer, author of Win Again, speaker, career coach, and business advisor. And I help athletes, executives, and entrepreneurs reach their fullest potential. What you're going to be hearing in every single episode are conversations with athletes and other sports-related influencers. And we'll be offering you the insight that you need to succeed in life, including advice that will let you jump past your competition, whether it be for a great new job or taking your business to a much, much higher level. Make sure to connect with me on social media at Mark Moyer Coach and go to my website, markmoyer.com, to get access to the tips and strategies that my coaching clients get directly. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email to mark@markmoyer.com and I'll get you going right away. Thanks for joining me today. It's going to be an awesome episode. Now, are you ready to make your mark? Let's do this. Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. My name is Mark Moyer and I'm broadcasting to you live from New York City. Super thrilled to have you on board wherever you're listening. If it's here in New York, awesome. Anywhere else in the United States, Mexico or Canada, great. And of course, anywhere else on the planet. Super thrilled to have you on board. Just finished an amazing conversation with Phil Costa. And Phil is a former NFL player with the Dallas Cowboys, a huge rival of mine and my New York Giants. So I won't hold that against him, but just a great guy. And what he's done is he's partnered with Rob to put together a book, basically a collection of 100 plus athletes and their stories, their advice, and their tips and strategies on how to make a transition. Obviously, something that's near and dear to me. This is what I talk about all day long, is how to help athletes make that transition. But before we jump into that episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button wherever you're accessing this, whether it's on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're catching this, great. Or if you're on my website, markmoyer.com, you can certainly access all the previous episodes. I've now up to, I think, 54 guests, and they've all been amazing, great episodes there. Also, you can access content that will help take your business and your career to a whole new level. And of course, my book, Win Again, which is the job search playbook for athletes. And that's really helped tons of athletes along the way. You should grab a copy if you can on Amazon or through the website itself. Otherwise, reach out to me anytime at mark@markmoyer.com if you want to either get any more job search advice or business advice, or if you'd like to recommend someone for the podcast. Enough about all that stuff. You're going to really love this episode with Phil. Great guy, great cause. He does a lot of talking about athlete transition and his stories in the NFL and his career before that. You're going to love it. Happy listening. Welcome to Mark Podcast. My name is Mark Moyer, and I'm super duper thrilled to have Phil Costa with me today. Phil is not only a former NFL player, but an author. And even though for those of you listening, you can't see me holding up this book, but just imagine it. It's called The Transition Playbook for Athletes and how elite athletes win after sports. And we're going to talk a bunch about that. We'll probably talk about my book, shameless plug, Win Again, available on Amazon and everywhere else, as is this book. But first of all, Phil, let's take several steps back. I want to hear a little bit about what really got you going in the sport of football, and then really how it's sort of taken you and the athletic mindset to where you are today. But we'll rewind the tape a little bit. Thanks for being here, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Yes, sir.
And, at what age did you start saying, well, you know what, I'm going to start playing sports. I love playing this sport, that sport. What were some of the sports you played as a kid?
Growing up, I played everything. So golf, football, basketball, baseball. And I was always just trying to keep up with my brother, who I was the youngest in the family. So really just trying to keep up with him. And still today, and I'll say this, with all the pro athletes I've played against, he's still up there with everybody, one of the best athletes. So I was trying to keep up with that my entire life.
Dang.
Yeah.
Bummer. Well, wait, so are you still trying to keep up with him, or?
We friendly competition. You know what I mean?
Ping pong at the Costa family barbecue is pretty...
It's still intense, but afterwards we're sitting down, hanging out, and yeah, it's calm at that point.
I can drink more beer than you. No, you can't. Anyway, but that's great. And so at what point did you start saying, well, you know what? Football might be a sport for me, or the sport for me?
In high school, I was on the high school golf team, basketball team, and football. It really wasn't until my junior year where my brother, he got a Division I scholarship, and I saw some of the players where they were going, and I kind of said, I was like, I think I can do that as well. So I think it was kind of seeing what other players did and what they achieved, and comparing myself early on to them.
And so tell me a little bit about how you decided to go to college and where you decided to go and all that sort of thing.
Well, I attended the University of Maryland. It was, at the time I went there, it was a #1 school in criminal justice, which what I wanted to major in. And thankfully, it was the only big D1 offer I got, so it worked out well. Coming out, I did not have a lot of offers. I was not a highly recruited guy, and I had the same transition when I went to the NFL, 5 years later. I wasn't the first, second, third, or seventh round pick. I was a free agent. So it was never, it was like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. I was always working to get there.
Well, and I've found that sometimes some of the great athletes, that's the direction they went, right? It's not always handed to you, and you have to really scramble and earn it. So you're at Maryland. You're actually there. Sounds like for academic reasons also, which I appreciate.
Combination, yeah definitely.
Are you? How are you using some of that criminal justice work now, or are you?
Not too much. You know what it is? It was a lot of psychology classes.
Okay. And
business is psychology. How you can work with people, get along with them, and understand them. So actually, I haven't really thought about that a ton, but I am using the criminal justice in that sense, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
How about yourself? What did you major in
so
college?
Anyway, we should move right along.
Yeah.
I was an economics major.
Okay.
But I was a geology minor. And people
That's an interesting combo.
Yeah, well... Yeah. And the geo minor really came about from actually being in the Rocks for Jocks class. I was like, well, I need an easy class. And it was a lot of the football guys were in that class. And the teacher was, notorious for giving easy grades and so forth. So
right.
I needed something to be a softball class a little bit. And but then I really started digging the science of it. It was really cool. And you learn how to, for example, find oil. Where do you find oil out there in the world, and shale and this and that, and different. Now, do I use geology now? Zero.
Although we'll go find oil. Let me know.
That. There's probably some in the middle of the street right now. But the econ side was pretty important, I guess.
Right.
So that was. But I was not necessarily an academic all-star, we'll say. I was more focused on some other parts of college life.
It's enough. A balancing act. You got to balance of fun, work, all that.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute, because most of the time when I speak to athletes that played collegiately, the big challenge with that can be balancing the commitment that you have to the sport and the commitment that you have to academics, and also trying to mix in there a social life and that sort of thing. Do you feel that in your case at Maryland, were you able to sort of have some of that social life mixed in with all? I mean, were you able to balance all those things fairly well? What was it like?
Yes and no. I think, it's tough to be the best at everything. If you want to be the best athlete, you're probably not going to have the best social life. If you want to be the best academically, it's a balancing act where social life, took a back seat. There's so many Friday nights, countless Friday, Saturday nights where, we're in, I say we, the team and my roommates, we're in at 9 o'clock going to bed because we have to get up and do practice the next day. So it was a lot of sacrifice there. But when we went out, people knew we went out and we had fun there too. So I'm not, we made up for it, I guess, when we did go out. But it was definitely a balancing act.
And it's interesting because I think a lot of people have this perception, it's the non-athlete public will say, has this perception that athletes are out there partying all the time because they see the footage of the guys at the clubs and this and that, right? And it's yes, there is some time that's spent there, but a lot of the time is you've got to balance your body. I mean, you've got to sleep, you've got to do all that stuff, and you got to be up early to work out and all that sort of thing.
It is, and one of the athletes, you just made me think of it there, that one of the athletes in the transition playbook is Chris Gronkowski, who, everybody knows his brother Rob, and the balancing act of that, just to speak about, with Rob and him for a little bit is, everybody knows the Gronk party ship, which was a big cruise ship that left Florida for 3 days, and Gronk ran the whole thing. I was on that with those guys for a few days, but I mean, 99.9%, the guys grinding, working, and the people see that small 1% and that gets blown up, but it's definitely, like you said, that balance.
It is. And So when you struck that balance at Maryland and you managed to graduate and all that sort of thing, but then tell me a little bit about, your hopes for the NFL. I mean, look, it's the world's best players, right? And were you thinking at any point, I've got a good shot or I don't have a good shot? Or what was your feeling before you were a free agent and so forth?
Yeah, so it was really in my senior year where afterwards, most players have agents. Most players, agents are recruiting them, right? And you fast forward 2 years later, I was a starting center for the Cowboys. I didn't have an agent. I had to call an agent. And I believed in myself, really. I said, you know what, I think I'm good enough. No agent was calling me. Called them. And after a lot of hang-ups, found a guy who took a shot on me. And it turned out to be a good investment for him as well, because he paid for my training and then, he was my agent throughout. But it wasn't, it was not a straight, narrow road. It was a lot of curves and bumps and hills to get there.
But obviously you stuck with it. Did you have at that time when you were thinking, I'm trying to get in the NFL, was there ever a plan B? Like, were you thinking, well, if this doesn't work out? Or at the time were you just saying, balls to the walls, I'm going for it?
That's the biggest challenge, I think, with athletes is plan B just sounds like failure, and that's one of the biggest lessons too. My answer is no, I did not. I kind of, I knew one thing, that saving and being smart financially would help set me up for after football. So that was the one thing I guess I did plan for that. And but that was the biggest thing. Is the biggest takeaway from the book was the earlier an athlete starts to prepare for the transition, the more successful they're going to be. The number of athletes who are preparing is, not as high. And I'm part of that majority, because it's
Well, and it's interesting because I think most of the athletes that I speak with, they go through the same thing where they're right. They don't want to almost acknowledge that they need a plan B. You're absolutely right. And it's not just a confidence thing. I'm sure they think, well, they can kick ass in whatever they do, but it's something where they want to make sure they live out their chance at a dream. So tell me how you ended up with the Cowboys then.
So after the draft, I got a call in the 6th round. They said, hey, if you're still available after, we want you to come here. Got a call in the 7th round from the Giants, actually. And they said, hey, if you're still available after, we want you to come here. I ended up with Dallas and started there as the 4th string center. I was a guy who wasn't supposed to be there for a week. After a week, wasn't supposed to be there for a month. After a month, 4 years later, I'm still there. And, a few contract things that happened at the end. But, I mean, I was fortunate. I love playing down there,
It's big down there, a little bit.
It's big. I mean, the Cowboys fans are some of the best fans out there.
Yeah.
The Eagles fans, where I'm from and live now, are some of the most passionate fans. But you can't beat Cowboys fans. I know we got some Giants and Jets, and we're filming here and recording in New York, so...
I tend to disagree. Anyway, but with that said, so you play out your time with the Cowboys, and I'm sure, as you said, you enjoyed it there. I'm sure there's plenty of successes. Probably some pretty dramatic failures with the No, I'm sorry. Anyway, no, I'm kidding around. But how did you know that time was up, or were you sort of forced out? I mean, what?
So my experience, I went for my 5th year. I signed with the Colts. And really it was physically, if I could have kept playing, I would have. What happened is I got out there and I was always, one of the strongest, if not the strongest guys on the team. I was a lot bigger back then, about 80 more pounds. And I got out there under a squat rack, 135 pounds. It's on my back. And it felt like 1,000, and my knees, after a few surgeries, fractured my back. It was kind of one of the things where physically my body couldn't do it. If it could have, I would have loved to keep playing.
So tell me a little bit about those first few months, or maybe, so you signed with the Colts, but you pulled the plug at that point. Did you end up watching any football on TV? Was there any sort of, or did you just try to distance yourself completely?
I watched some football. So I did watch some games the first year, which is pretty common. A lot of players, I don't think they do. But from there... my plan, I didn't have much of a plan. I just knew I physically couldn't do football anymore. I didn't know what was next. And from there, lost, a lot of weight. And, I was searching for jobs,
How?
Good question. So what I did was, and it's some advice in the book where looking back, I think it was probably one of the better things, is I reached out to people in fields that I was interested in. So I met with a lawyer, politician, realtor, doctor, and met with all these people, had coffee with them, nothing, serious. And I asked them the question was, what is your day like? What do you do? And found if it was something I'd be interested in doing. And I stuck with something in the medical field from there.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember you mentioned that you did medical sales for a while.
Yep.
And how did you even, what made you say, you know what, I want to be sitting in, I love the sight of blood. I love the sight of like these surgeries happening. I mean, that will never happen in my lifetime. I'm pretty confident. So I'm really confident of that. So what steered you into that medical field?
So my dad is a doctor. My mom's a nurse. I'm sure that has something to do with it there. But what I really enjoyed about it, and I did it for, a number of years, where I was in over 500 heart surgeries, and you're a technician in there, where it was similar to football in the sense that we're in the hallway and it's, the nurse is in the hall, the doctor, and we're out there, joking and just talking about things. But once you cross the threshold into the room, and on the football field we used to say, hit that switch, and once you put the helmet on, you turn it on. Mm-hmm. So it's 0 to 100. Mm-hmm. The 0 to 100 moment in medical device sales is when you cross and step into the room, you're on. It is literally there. It's life and death with buttons you're pushing, decisions you're making.
So tell me briefly about the product itself that you were selling.
So I was selling pacemakers. Pacemakers and defibrillators internally. So it was intellectually stimulating, very challenging. You're having conversations with a heart surgeon who's in school for 10 years, been doing it for another 10 or 20 after, and you have to be able to have a holding conversation with him. So it was intellectually challenging.
Well, it's funny because every once in a while you'll hear people say, well, it's not like you're a brain surgeon, but I've never heard anybody refer to a heart surgeon. So it's like,
right.
I guess that's you don't have to be as smart to be it. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, but that's great. So so you were doing that for a while, and when did you exit? Like what brought you out of that?
Well, so I did that for a number of years, and while I was doing that, I also attended up here in New York. I would travel back from Philly to New York every other weekend and live up here, where I got an MBA at Columbia right down the street. So from there, my company got purchased, and it was a lot of people were let go with that. I could have stayed in the industry, but I was fortunate to have some time. And from there, I said, I have this time right now. So I spent the last year and a half in Europe, in Spain, and I was able to work on the book and write the book from there while learning Spanish. Where I thought, at least if the book fails, at least I can speak Spanish, and fortunately the book's it's done well, and I can still, hold my own there.
Now, as a special treat for our listeners and viewers, you will be reading chapter 1 and 2 in Spanish for us.
I love to.
Please
no,
don't.
I love it. I took Spanish class over there.
But do you have the accent though? You think? Yeah.
I'll tell you what. I can speak it, understand it.
Yeah.
My accent is like.
Yeah, you got to work on that.
Oh man, it's tough.
You got to say, "Yo quiero una cerveza ahora,
sí,
por favor."
Sí. Otro, sí.
Anyway, so what prompted you to do tell me a little bit about your, the partner in the book, right?
Yep.
And then what prompted this period?
So the co-author is Rob Curley. Rob is a New Jersey guy. I met him in 9th grade. So we've been best friends for a long time. And Rob was a professional athlete as well, played professional football over in Europe and played at Lafayette College here. But what prompted it was when I was done playing, I struggled with the transition. And I bounced out of it relatively quickly. He's 6 months or a year. And a lot of people, they would say, you jumped out of it pretty quick. But I'll share the story with you is I was at NFL Films in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, talking to a former New York Giants player. The Giants player, we have about a 20-minute conversation. And I finally just said to him, I said, like, dude, like, you're making it look easy. You're NFL All-Pro. Now you're a successful commentator. Like, what's the trick? And he said the 3 words to me that really changed and completely changed how I viewed things. And he goes, I struggle too. And it is a tough dude, tough as nails guy saying that, to me. And I was like, all right, it's okay to be vulnerable. Fast forward in a year, when I was working in medical device sales, I was accepted to Columbia Business School. I get a call from a teammate who was in the same place I was, asking the same questions. And I finally just said to him, I'm like, dude, I struggle too. And I just heard on the other end of the phone was like he felt normal again. And that was a powerful moment where, I started doing more research in this topic, and I was like, we need more. There has to be more resources, athlete to athlete.
Absolutely. And some sort of bigger mentorship program, almost like from those that have gone through it. And you know this as well as anybody. I mean, the average career is sort of 2 to 3 years in the NFL, and there's such a huge amount. I mean, the amount of players that play even on the practice squad, or they get signed to a couple weeks and this and that. It's incredible, and they don't have the support. I mean, I can talk about this all day long, that we think they should have, right? So the book itself, you reached out to, you and Rob reached out to, I'm sure, a couple hundred or whatever it was, athletes in sort of every type of background, right?
Right.
And what did you ask them? What was the criteria? What did you want to hear from these athletes and their stories?
So we reached out. We, culminated with and finished with, 25 Olympians in the book, over 30 different sports, and over 100 athletes. And we wanted to know what their experience was like. What do they wish they knew? What would they tell somebody coming out? And what would they tell somebody, what they struggled with, what they didn't struggle with, resources. And that's where we got linked up, was your book was a resource that one of the athletes recommended. And, it's something that they're using right now to help them with the transition.
And in your experience with the athletes in this book, where do you think they could use more help with, or can they, or are they all set?
No, athletes, well, the thing that's interesting is with transition, even if, you overcame the athlete transition, there's so many life transitions. And even if for an athlete to use them, well, you're going to have something face you differently in 3 or 5 years if you switch jobs, and that's another transition. So some of the best advice, I think, for current athletes they would take away from reading this book, there's an athlete in there who was a All-American, former Olympian, and what he shares, his name's John Register, what he shares is when you're an athlete going to these events, like we're going to an event tonight, right? Well, for a current athlete who's a player, current, NFL or whatever they are, when you go to these events, don't show up as a celebrity. Show up as somebody who truly wants to network and meet other people. And it's such a different perspective, they'll give themselves. And that was coming straight from him, where I think he's saying that because he did that. He did not do that. Right. And now he realized that he wishes he did. Just show up as somebody who wants to engage and network and meet people.
Well, it's funny, and I told you this story earlier, that one of the biggest impacts an athlete had on me was when this is many, many years ago, I was attending a card show, and I wanted him to sign my baseball or something. And there were several of these, Mickey Mantle was there, and Barry Bonds was there, actually, but Brooks Robinson was there, and he was one of my sort of like heroes a little bit.
Right.
And I'll never forget when he asked, when I gave him the ball to sign, he said, "What's your name?" I said, "It's Mark." And he said, "Well, Mark, what do you do for a living?" And I was looking at him like, "Wait, you actually give a flying crap?"
Yeah.
Like, really? And he goes, "Yeah, I'm curious to know." And as you can tell, I'll never forget that, right? I've met hundreds of athletes, almost all of them I have mostly forgotten, because it was all about them and, signing, whatever they were doing. So you're absolutely right. And the advice you got from John is spot on, where as an athlete, if you attend an event and you can go in there with, yes, you can reference the fact that you played, but it's all about you're talking about, well, this is what I want to learn from you. I'm curious to hear about your experience, Nancy Smith or Bob Jones or whatever it is. And
right.
Tell me more about what you do. I'm really curious. I'm interested, because that person will remember you forever. I mean, mostly. So that's great advice.
100%.
Now, where are you hoping to? I mean, because this book is great. Look, when I found out that you had written this book, first of all, I was like, "Who the hell is this guy and what's he doing?" But I read it and I really loved it because it's. I believe when an athlete hears it and reads it from other athletes, it's sort of the stamp of approval, right? And I felt that it was an uplifting kind of a book. It's something where everybody was saying, "Look, we all went through this. We're all going through this. We're all fired up to do this, and you're going to get through it." And just as you said, sort of, what are the three words?
I struggle too.
Yeah, I struggle too. Absolutely.
Being vulnerable and that mentality of, especially I think to use the NFL, which is my background, in a locker room, you don't show vulnerability, you don't show weakness, and that's something that I think a little bit, maybe during football, I don't know, but after football, there's something powerful to that and to sharing that, the power of that shared experience among these athletes.
Well, and that brings me to, there's somebody I know very well, his name is Eric Cusin, and he's got an organization, it's called We're All a Little Crazy. And it's
I like that.
But it's referencing, it's an organization where he's pulled together athletes from around the world, and he's basically trying to destigmatize mental health issues because every athlete, one way or another, goes through that. Well, I mean, mostly everybody does. But he's saying, look, you know what? The more people can speak about it and come out, and so you're starting to see more and more now everywhere. It's coming out. I know, especially in the NBA, they talk about it quite a bit because it's interestingly, being an athlete can be a very lonely existence because it seems like you've got your family, which is your team, and then many people have their external. I mean, their real families, their wife and kids and husbands and so on. But when you're under a constant spotlight like that, you feel like it's you and you're being exposed. I mean, everybody's looking at you, and it can be kind of lonely and scary at the same time. And I think sometimes athletes, I mean, they're not trained to necessarily be 100% mentally on it all the time. They're more meant to be physically on it, right? And I think that's one of the big struggles. And I think a lot of that comes out in the book, and that's one thing I really appreciated reading was that if an athlete reads this, I think they're going to come out of it saying, well, look, I'm ready now. I mean, I'm in the right frame of mind. I understand that I'm going through this also, and everyone else has gone through this too. That's great. So where do you want to, I mean, aside from selling, 2 or 3 million copies of this book, which would be nice, right? Where would you like to, what would you like to do with it? Do you want to do you want to go out on tour, like a speaking series? Do you want to do more books?
The number one goal right now is, this book is only a few months old.
Yeah.
And we've partnered with some big names. We have books purchased by Major League Soccer PA, EY, Ernst & Young, and the International Women's Forum. So we have some big customers, and it's really just spreading the word. And that's where we want to be a great resource in this space for athletes.
Yeah, and I think that, and I'm obviously pretty passionate about this.
Yeah.
I mean,
you wrote a book about it.
I wrote a book about it, and the amazing thing, and I've said this before, but I didn't go into this with the idea of writing a book, but when I want to do some more research about the whole notion of helping athletes transition, and my perspective is a little different. I don't have a PhD in anything at all, I promise, but I've been helping people with their careers and their businesses for a long time.
Right.
And when I went on to Amazon to look at all the other books that were written about athlete transition, and I didn't find a single one, I was absolutely blown away. I mean, there are some that have been written where you read, it's written by an athlete and he or she talks about their experience. But there's nothing in there that was tips and strategies on how to actually move forward. And I was like, well, there should be at least one book like that. So that's what compelled me to write this one. But I think that what I want to hear is, are you planning, or would you consider, I know you just wrote this one, but do you think this could be an interesting series and continue to add more of these?
I think we have some ideas with that. Right now, though, it's about making this, is getting the word out and marketing, and, athletes, even if it's the best or one of the best books in the world, if athletes don't know about it, it doesn't help them.
Yeah.
And that's what our goal is right now, is to really spread the word.
That's great. So give me right now, just off the top of your head, if I'm just starting a career in any professional sport, whatever it might be, What kind of piece of advice can you give me that you think I might actually pay attention to and listen to and use?
Yeah, humble. And I think the idea of going from expert to novice was, something I went through personally. When I went to, from the NFL, you're an expert in that field. You're an expert in football. I didn't want to stay in football at that time. So when you jump fields, I was in, the operating room, worked in medical device sales. Well, you go to a novice again. And that mentality, it's challenging, where you better listen 2 times or 10 times probably as much as you're talking. And it's being confident, but also, it's being humble. And I think that was something that I struggled with in the beginning, and I learned over time to, how to approach that.
Well, that's such a great point, because I know that most athletes, when they reach the pinnacle of their sport, they sometimes forget that it took them 20 years to get to that point. And sometimes when they go to their next, whatever it is, their next endeavor, they feel like, well, I'm already an expert in this. Just as you said, I deserve to be an expert in the next thing. And no, you got to come down a few. But I also want to maybe help an athlete understand that they don't need to go to the bottom rung necessarily, because as an athlete, they bring so many skills and capabilities to the table that they sometimes don't realize they have. And give me a couple of things that, you feel that an athlete brings, whether it's their mindset or whatever, to whether it's a company or running a business, that sometimes they don't realize they have.
Well, I think, people talk about the teamwork, dedication, work ethic, all these different things. Something that an athlete that's a little unique. I'd have to think. I think it's the collection of all those different traits. Tell me.
I'll tell you one right now.
Yeah,
here's one right off the bat. The average person would not feel comfortable sitting on a couch doing a podcast.
Right.
The average non-athlete is terrified being in front of a camera, or being on a stage, or being in a stadium, being in front of people. So to me, an athlete often doesn't realize that they bring that sort of confidence that they've been so used to doing it for so long. They don't realize that they have that they can get into a variety of careers that tie in with, whether it's, public relations, media work, giving presentations to corporations, sales, business development. The fact that you were able to stand and sell a product in an operating room and that sort of thing, the average person cannot do that. And I think a lot of times, if, for example, an athlete was taught, trained, all these different things about that, they've got all these skills and the mindset. I mean, to me, hiring an athlete is something I'd love to do, because I know that they're gonna fight to the bitter end to get to that goal. Their work ethic, yes, is tremendous, but also the ability to pivot on the fly. When you're playing football, you're doing a play, but then all of a sudden, if this guy over here runs towards you and he's not supposed to be otherwise, you're like, wait a second, I've got to do something else now.
Right.
And you've got to make instant decisions. And that's the kind of a trait that I'd love to have in someone working for me, is the ability to think on the fly and act on the fly, right? And again, that's something that athletes don't necessarily realize they have. There's so many other elements that they've got that, I think that it's just the mindset and the confidence, but also they have the innate ability to be coached and to be managed.
I was about to say that, coachable. Yep.
Yeah.
Athletes are coachable.
You know what? Most people are not. I'm not. I'll tell you right now, I'm I never take my own advice. That's off the record, of course. But anyway, so these are all things that I think that as you start meeting and getting out there more and more with this book and promoting it and speaking to other athletes, maybe you can start giving them a little bit of that heads up too, that there's a lot more that they've got that are non-physical traits, that are mental traits that, to me, make athletes really stand out. And, where some of the athletes may not have the education level that, let's say, some of the executives out there have or other people have, but it doesn't matter, because you've got so much more that, to me, can add up to a lot more.
Right, and that's, to that point is, you just made me think of it. When I was in business school and I was in there, what did I do? I played in the NFL, and then, I worked, it was only for a few years at that time. in medical device sales. But, I'm in there with people who have been in 10 years and, some of the top firms, Facebooks, the Googles of the world, and the top firms in the country and the world. Well, I realized then I brought different skill sets. They might have been more technical, where, I might have been more creative, and maybe I think it did come a lot from sports in some ways, creating solutions and thinking about things on the fly. Athletes, I think they know a lot of the skills they bring, but this is where I would challenge athletes is, okay, you work hard, you're disciplined. Think about specific examples and times where you can tell somebody you're interviewing with, or, tell a story about when you did that, and be specific about it, because that really makes it stand out instead of just saying, I work hard. And I made that flaw when I interviewed in the medical device industry. Bombed the first interview, bombed it, because I said these things like I'm a hard worker. Like, I thought my resume spoke for itself, which it did in some sense, but at the same time, like, give us some more, and did not do well there. And the guy gave me a book, probably about 4 of these together, and he goes, study this, I'll give you a call in 3 months. And I did. Every day I studied it. Every day I went home for hours and hours, read it. We met again in 3 months, and we were talking about, the intricacies of the heart. But it was something that I learned, the hard way. And I don't want other athletes to have to learn that way.
That's great. It's funny because and I love that example of giving examples, because you're absolutely right. Sometimes I've heard people say, well, it's important to be a team player. Well, of course it is. So if somebody's asking you, well, Phil, are you a team player? Well, yes. I mean, of course you're going to say that.
Right.
But what they're going to want to hear is examples of, right? And you don't necessarily want to bring up, well, I played for the Cowboys, so I'm a team player. But instead, talk about a time that you worked in collaboration with somebody else, or you did something together with somebody else, and you were able to, achieve something successful because of that. Now, if you were to, let's say, meet a recently retired player, so I asked you earlier about, well, what kind of advice would you give somebody that's still playing humble? You said humble. But someone that's out now, and let's say they're struggling. I know you said earlier about, trying to find something you have a strong interest in and look for opportunities there. But how can someone, in your opinion, find people that are in, let's say I wanted to get into, let's say I played a certain sport, let's say I was a skier, and I came up with a great idea on how to make ski pants that were more aerodynamic, I don't know, something like that. What do you think, how can I meet other people in that apparel, like ski apparel industry?
I think athletes, and this shocked me a little bit, people are receptive. People want to help other people. Especially if they think they're, being true and their values align. People want to help. So it's not some big, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Reach out to the person. Shoot them an email. Send them a message on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook. We got 100 of these athletes. Before the book, I knew one Olympian. We have 25 in the book. So it's not like everybody's like, oh, your network must be incredible. Well, we built that over time. We've reached out, heard a lot of yeses, a lot of nos, but it's a numbers game. If you hear one no, keep going. And I think that's part of it, is athletes, as new to them, is hearing no in this space. It's like you might not make a kick, or might miss a pass or something like that. But, people, they want to be around you. So when people say no in that sense, it's like, it's something new.
That's a very good point. And I think that you always hear in every single book I've read, written by an athlete, they always say, when you fall down, you got to dust yourself up and pick yourself back up again, right? Mm-hmm. But that's a great metaphor for failure and bouncing back. But you're right. I don't know how often they're used to hearing the word no, and that's sometimes the hardest thing to get past, is that ability to hear no once, twice, 3 times, and keep on going after it. Now, when you say go after these people, and you just got to ask, right? But how would you, let's say, okay, so back to my example.
All right.
And now you're the one actually that's designed this ski, whatever I said, pants that are more aerodynamic, or whatever the hell I said.
Yeah.
And I'm the ski executive guy, or in charge of that area. how would you approach me? What would you say? How do you think you'd want to? I mean, I'm just sitting behind my laptop somewhere in Norway or wherever I am.
I would say, yeah. So short and sweet. Most people do. Fun fact: most people don't read emails that take longer than 30 seconds to read.
Yeah.
So keep it under 30 seconds.
Okay.
If you can't get it across in that amount of time, there's a problem. So get it across in a few sentences, and keep it casual. It doesn't have to be super formal. It's just, hey, I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to, share my idea. And I bet more often than not, people will say yes.
That's great. And I've also found, though, that when you're reaching out to somebody, it's really critical to make sure that they understand that you're offering value in return. It's not just, hey, I need your help, but it's more so, listen, I've got a big network of people that I think can help. I've got some ideas, in this case with the whatever I said, the ski pants. Why on earth I thought of ski pants? I have no idea. Anyway, but anyway, the point is that as an athlete, if you say, look, I'd love to talk to you and listen to you about what you do. I'd love to get your advice. I'd love to get your insight in this. At the same time, I mean, it's got to be sort of a two-way street, not one way. That's sort of the what do you call it? The cardinal rule of networking in general.
Right.
All right. So look, we've covered a lot of ground. I think that look, at the end of the day, you are clearly passionate about really working with and helping athletes make that transition. You went out and reached out to you end up with over 100 athletes in your book, which is really it's a great feat. And I really liked what a lot of them said. They all had great contributions, but actually, I shouldn't ask you who your favorite is, because that's breaking the rules. You can't. It's like picking a favorite child or whatever it is.
There were some great ones.
Yeah, there were some good ones. But switching gears, I want to do a little segment that I call Hit Your Mark. It's a little quick, snappy thing or whatever it is. And the first one's a pretty easy question. I mean, you played center, all right? I never. What made you pick center versus, let's say, right guard, left guard? Right? What made you want to hold that ball and hike it to,
You're the captain of the 5 guys or 7 guys on the line. So you're in charge of, setting pace and setting direction of where everybody goes. So it's like a mini CEO. The quarterback's a real CEO, but you're like the mini CEO. You're like the vice president there.
But you're not. You were not mini CEO. You were maxi CEO.
Yeah.
You were massive CEO. But all right, so this is something that, I'm going to break a cardinal rule of like the huddle or something like that. But you hike the ball, but doesn't it drive you absolutely bananas when one of the guys jumps early? You're still in the
It's part of the deal.
Oh, come on.
Part of the deal. And the same reason, say if a quarterback, makes a bad pass or, a receiver drops the ball, everybody's trying their best. It happens. You can't jump off sides or do too many things, too many bad times or too many times bad, or you won't be there. So it takes care of itself. It self-corrects,
I don't know if I like that answer.
No?
Nah, not really. It would drive me. I mean, I'd be the guy in the thing that would probably say, like, Jim, what the hell? Look at the ball and you see it. But anyway, you're a good guy. You're a nice guy. Jeez. And you're from the Philly area. I'm a little surprised. Anyway.
Yeah, right.
So.
You put the aggression towards the other team.
That's a good point.
Lift your own guys up.
There you go. All right, fine. That's good. Now, did you have a... Well, wait, how many, let's see, was it always Romo or who was always behind you?
Mostly Romo, John Kitna, who played in the league forever.
Yep.
We don't have time on the quick hit section, but I almost hit him with a golf ball when I was 13. And I told him that when I was 22, snapping him the ball. And he goes, God, I'm old. Yeah.
That's good. Well, and he but he played a long time.
He played
That's
a long
great,
time.
right?
He played an incredible, great guy, great career, yeah.
So with Romo, what was his style in the huddle? Was he a motivator, or was he just like, was he always the boss? What was that like?
He was super calm. He was a motivator and a guy who led by example. He, especially in the huddle, big games, he's calm, fourth quarter, we got 2 minutes to go, we're down by 3, and nerves of steel.
How about you?
I mean, you got to be calm in there. You know?
Like, why are you calm? This is
Yeah.
great. No, I'm kidding. That's great. One thing that always is interesting, and I think the average fan, so most people don't go to football games. They tend to watch it on TV. And or if they go to the games, I think when you're at a game, I think you feel like the field's a lot smaller than you imagine it, because on TV it just makes it, because of where the angles and so on. And then when you see how this is, right here, this is a yard.
Right.
And you're thinking, all I got to do is just fall over, and that's 2 yards, 3 yards right there. How hard is that on 3rd and 2 to get and the part that people, like, you're laughing because you're thinking, well, because there's 300-pound guys that are trying to prevent you from doing that, and they'll snap you in half if you try. So, but I think that a lot of times the public perception is completely different than reality and what's happening on the field. But and the same thing goes for the perception in baseball. Like when you step onto the field at Yankee Stadium, if you ever have the chance to do that, and you look all around you see this. I mean, any baseball stadium, you see these. It's huge, it's massive. But what's interesting is that the field itself seems smaller than if you're watching it from way up top there.
Right. Huh.
And one other thing is, you play golf. So, would you say what do you use? Like not even a wedge, like a sand wedge to hit it 120, 130 onto the green, right? Something like that.
I wish. It sounds good. We'll say that for the podcast. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, come on. Anyway, but in all sincerity, 130 yards is nothing. It's just right there, right? You can drive it maybe 300 yards, whatever, 250, whatever. And what's interesting is hitting a baseball over the fence in center field is the same distance as
a bomb,
It's a 130-yard pitch, just boom. And our perception, when I see that stick right here, and I'm saying, I'm just hitting at 130 of that, the idea of hitting a baseball that far, I'm like, how hard is that?
Right.
It's weird, but that's the whole. It's strange when. All right, I don't even know what does this have to do with Hit Your Mark. Anyway, as you can see, off the rails. All right, so who hit you the hardest? Who can you remember hit you the hardest?
Probably my former teammate Jay Ratliff. We used to have some battles. Yeah.
Was he? But he was Redskins when he was against you, right? Or
he was with Dallas for about 9 or maybe 10 years, and then finished with a couple other teams.
Yeah.
But we would have a lot of battles.
What, like in campers? I mean, in practice? You're talking about when
just
he was with the other team?
No, when he was with, even during practice, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. For probably again another team, when we were up in New England playing against Vince Wilfork, and they had Albert Hainsworth at that time. Yeah. So
Big boys.
you got to pick who you want to go. I mean, you're lucky either way. They were tough guys.
That's great. And what is? Give me one of the funniest that's semi-PG rated, let's say, pranks that you ever saw done, like in a locker room or something, or on an airplane or something. Like, what are some of the funny things that? Name something funny that you saw happen to somebody.
Good question. A little bit. Well, in the NFL, I mean, if you can Google it and find it, I don't think they do it anymore, but they would do the rookie haircuts. And you know what a checkerboard, you have the, checkerboard, and I had that for about a week in my head. Another guy had I think half shaved and one eyebrow, and that was a Dallas thing. I don't think it is anymore, but that was part of it, part of the rookie pranks.
That's great. In the well, then sometimes like when baseball, you see the rookies have to wear like these outrageous like dresses and all kinds of crazy stuff and everything. So I was always curious about that. And so going forward, and it's early to talk about legacy and so forth, but what are some of the things that you'd like people to start thinking about when they talk about you?
To talk about me?
Yeah.
Interesting. Good question. I want people to say diverse, eclectic, where I have a lot of interests. Do not define myself as an athlete. I was fortunate to go to a very good, Ivy League school, fluent in another language. I'm fortunate to have a couple businesses. So I want people to think eclectic and diverse, a lot of diverse interests.
Cool. And someone who loves to help, right? You're a helper. You're a giver, not a taker, something like that, right?
That's it.
In the karma bank, you're ahead.
Well, that's where, with the book, that's how we really viewed it, is, we did a lot of work. We donated over $7,000 of pre-sale proceeds to charity. I'm partnering with that charity now again. And, this is our gift in a big way to athletes.
That's great. Well, look, you've been an awesome guest, Phil. You clearly are. I mean, this podcast is called Make Your Mark, and you've shown how you make your mark. I love that. And, I want you to, I'm excited to see how you take this and really run with it going forward. I'm sure there's all kinds of football motifs and blah, blah, blahs we can use and all that stuff, but I won't get into those. But thanks again for being on. It's been great.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's wonderful. And we'll all keep posted on our collective efforts with really helping athletes make that transition.
Definitely.
So appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us today on this episode of Make Your Mark podcast. The goal of the podcast is to help you find ways to make your mark, to succeed in life, and to jump past your competition. Be sure to leave me a review on iTunes and Stitcher, and subscribe to be the first to hear new episodes. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email, mark@markmoyer.com, and I'll get back to you right away. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.